Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Link Senior webinar. We'll get started in just a minute as we allow the attendees to enter the room here. Just a reminder that today's webinar will be live streamed in our Activity Strong Facebook group page, but for the CEU credit, you must be logged into the Zoom room today. All right, good afternoon and welcome to today's Link Senior webinar. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin today. We are providing one free NAB, NCAP, and NCC-DP CEU credit to participants who are joining us live today. To be eligible for that CEU credit, you need to remain on the webinar for the full hour. The Zoom meeting room will track how long you stay in the room and will send that as a digital report to me. We are not able to provide CEUs to people who join only by phone. At the end of the webinar today, I will provide the required post-webinar CEU survey evaluation link in the webinar room chat box. I will also be sending this CEU survey to you via email, so please be sure to check your email spam folder. If you don't receive that survey link today, please email me right away so that I can send it to you directly. I am pasting my email address in the chat box now so that you have that. Please fill out that survey no later than midnight this Thursday, July 16th, to be eligible for the CEU credit. If you are not looking for that CEU credit, we still want your feedback, so please go ahead and fill out the short survey as well. CEU certificates will be issued by email on Friday, July 17th this week. Again, please be sure to check your spam folder in case it lands there. You will be receiving a PDF of today's slide deck and a recording of today's webinar by email this afternoon along with the CEU survey. And with that, I'll hand it over to Charles D. Vilmorin, CEO of Link Senior.
Thanks a lot, Megan. Welcome, everybody. I hope you are doing well. It's July 14th. It's actually Bastille Day in France, and I happen to be French, so I hope you're celebrating a little bit of the French side you have all in you. But welcome, and before we get started, I had a very quick message for the audience, which is that as we navigate this pandemic, as we navigate COVID-19, I've already mentioned several times how much I find amazing the work that you do, how much respect I have for the fact that you decide every day to show up at work and to engage your residents, to engage our older adults so they can live with purpose. I find that admirable. Our team finds that admirable because thanks to you, they can stay connected to who they are. Now, you deciding to show up at work every day is fantastic, and the industry has been pretty good at celebrating that with you see these signs that heroes work here, and I think that in the press we've seen a little bit of that, which is great. But I have I'd like to add something to it, which is very personal, and that is that I'm actually the father of 4 children. They're all under 10. And I can tell you one thing, which is that if my child were able to do half of what you do, right, by showing up at work, I would be an extremely proud father. So again, I want to reiterate how much I'm thankful for the work you do and how much it is an honor to be able to call this industry and your profession ours. So with that, thank you again. Cool. So the presentation today is actually very dear to my heart. It's about the emotional management, the importance of self-care, and the fact that it's actually not just for our residents. And I'm happy to have with us to deliver this presentation Dr. Jennifer Stelter, who is the Operations Director of Clinical Programs for Elder Management, and also the co-founder of her company called NeuroEssence. So let me give you a little bit of background on these webinars, and we'll get into the presentation. So as some of you might have been on our webinars before, we actually started these back in January 2018, which obviously seems years away now. But the whole idea is we understand that the more we empower and educate staff like you, the better the life of the residents, because you have the tools to know how to optimize resident engagement, how to optimize anything that is activities, life enrichment, rec therapy, or wellness. And, you know, we've been really blessed in a way, or we've been very lucky with a lot of these speakers are of fantastic quality, including today. But the one thing I'd like to mention to you is that a lot of these speakers or ideas come from you, the audience. So that is, in a way, an invitation. If you think of anyone that should be on our webinars, if you think of any topic that we haven't done and would be interesting and helpful to you, please send us a note. As Megan mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Link Senior, and I'd like just to share a few things about Link Senior. We provide a resident engagement platform for senior care, and we're based in Washington, D.C. And in other words, we provide tools to help providers engage their residents in a more meaningful way and bring purpose in a therapeutic way. Our work has been published in peer-reviewed journal, and we are also the people behind the Old People Are Cool campaign. You've probably seen that. We have this great website also called oldpeopleare.cool. And obviously, recently, as some of you might know, in the light of COVID-19, we also initiated this platform called Activity Strong. And that platform is really dedicated to, again, activity and life enrichment directors, with the idea and the goal to acknowledge the awesome work that you do, educate you, and also empower you so you have the right tools to engage the older adults you serve, the residents you serve. On that note, I want to mention the fact that on the website there is a store, and yesterday I received a mask that I ordered. So this is a little spiel. If you're interested in Activity Strong masks like this, feel free to order some. The one thing I'd like to mention is all the benefits, all the profits from these sales, they go into a scholarship for the National American Activity Professional Association, NAP, sorry, I butchered the name, for NAP. And it goes into the scholarship fund to be able to fund the education for activity directors. So again, this is about Activity Strong, and we will have a further announcement at the end of this webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce you briefly to the topic today. So again, joining us today is Dr. Stelter. She is a clinical psychologist. She has 20 years of experience in healthcare, and she's currently a consultant with Elder Management. She also created her own company, NeuroEssence, that focuses on helping providers and the community on topics such as mental health and dementia care. And she's also currently writing a book. So with that, quick word about me. Again, the CEO and co-founder of Link Senior, and probably the thing that I'm most proud of here is the fact that I did go through MEPAC 1, which is Education for Activity Directors. So usually in this presentation, I give little thoughts before the main speaker. This one's going to be very short, and it's going to go back to the Activity Strong Manifesto that we put out when we started Activity Strong, which is here, two things. We've had probably hundreds of activity directors or life enrichment staff ask us, are we really essential, right? And there's no question about it. Activities, resident engagement, life enrichment is essential Therefore, you, everyone on the line, are essential workers and are essential to the well-being of your residents, but also the health of your community and the work that your organization provides. One of the other thing also, sentences that we had on this manifesto is the fact that we know we should put on oxygen mask on first, but don't always do that. And I think that is a common trait often with activity and life enrichment professionals, is sometimes the need of recognizing the idea that self-care is important, and that maybe self-care could actually help us do more our work and maybe do our work better. So with that, I'd love to give the mic to Dr. Sauter and have a, sorry, here we go. And thank you very much, Dr. Sauter, for your presentation. Do you have the control?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So thank you, Charles. I want to thank you and also Link Senior for this opportunity to present today. I also want to second what you had said with regards to all the professionals that we have on the line today, to say thank you for everything that you guys have been doing. Charles and I have talked over this pandemic quite frequently, and I also have been working the front lines, helping out wherever I can. And so it's actually been a very rewarding experience, but in the kind of interim of everything, right, we're taking a look at how, as professionals, we are affected by it as well. Obviously, first and foremost, we are taking care of our residents, we're taking care of our families, virtually, of course, but in essence, who and when are we taking care of ourselves, right? And that's a key thing. And I was sharing with Charles why this topic is just so paramount right now, is that many professionals I've reached out to, or individuals who work for me, you know, they've come to me and said, you know what, I have seen and heard so much, and I don't know how to deal with it. And so I think that this comes at an optimal time right now, where we do need to focus on our own self-care and put that oxygen mask on. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So I have a few objectives that I hope to meet today that you can walk away with. One is definitely to review the prevalence of self-care deficiencies and burnout in healthcare. I think it's important to understand where are we at now and where do we need to get to. I also want to discuss the science behind emotional management. It's important to look at what is actually happening in our brain and our body in order for us to understand the basis of the why when it comes to our emotions. And then I want to, of course, end with lots of coping strategies that you can put in your toolbox to help you. With these coping strategies, it may be things that perhaps you've tried in the past that have worked for you, and you just kind of need to brush the cobwebs off and be like, oh yeah, I remember I used to do that, and I really enjoyed that. That really helped me before. I'm going to try that again. Some of these tools you may say, you know what, they're not for me. I've tried them before, and it hasn't worked, and that's okay. And some of these you're going to say, you know, I've never tried that, and I'm going to try it. I'm going to just hop in and I'm going to try it. And so I'm hoping that I can fill your toolbox with many different items. The fun part about this, of course, is that as you're filling your own toolbox, right, you're also going to be thinking about, oh, I could use that with this resident, and I could use this with maybe perhaps this family member, right? Individuals that, of course, we're treating every day. You're going to find these strategies helpful for them as well. And then it will end with, how do you incorporate this into your lifestyle? It's easy to say, but not easy to do. And we need to make sure that we make time to do that. So let's talk about the prevalence here. I did my own survey over a period of at least 6 months with a variety of classes that I've done. I tried to kind of throw in a self-care survey, if you will, of healthcare professionals and caregivers. And I wanted to get an idea of where do our deficits lie when it comes to caring for ourselves. And so take a look at this. 55% of that focus group that I had worked with, they answered that they do struggle with self-care, and they have struggled with self-care at some point in the past. That's half of us, and that's an astounding number. 60% answered that they don't spend much time taking care of themselves because they're taking care of others. 45% answer that they have lost touch of their hobbies or they don't necessarily have a hobby. And 40% answer that at times they feel guilty when they're caring for themselves because they're caring for others. So these are just astounding numbers that we have to recognize and accept that this is what is happening. And that's where we are, but we need to, of course, get to the point where we are regularly taking care of ourselves. You know, we live in a self-care society and, you know, our words echo. We talk so much to our residents and to our families about taking care of themselves, right? We try to hit every aspect of their health, from their physical health, emotional, cognitive, spiritual, right? We try to hit all of those, whether it be in our activity programs or whether it be through the use of psychological therapy, or even in our folks who are PT, OTs, and STs, right? We talk so much to our residents and our families about taking care of themselves that we don't end up practicing what we preach, okay? We find ourselves struggling with keeping up with our own needs. And how does this happen, right? And, you know, anybody can probably say, you know, why do I not take care of myself, right? These are kind of the big markers that I've noticed when talking to professionals is time. That's probably one of the biggest ones, is that where in my day do I have time to do this? You know, I take care of a family, I work full time, my kids have after school sports, you know, I've got, you know, other responsibilities, maybe it's you're president of a club or things like that, right? When do I have time to do this? The second thing we found, right, guilt. Guilt is the biggest one, is we think about what else can we be doing during the time that we would be caring for ourselves, right? I've got this meeting to go to, I've got to prepare for this, I've got this project due, I've got to get my kids off to this, you know, whatever it might be. And so that might be running through our minds when we are taking care of ourselves, and so we end up taking care of ourselves less often. And the third I would say is insight, is that sometimes we move into this sense of kind of emotional grief, and sometimes we're stuck and we don't even know we're there, okay? And I would have to say that we're all kind of, you know, we're probably have all experienced that at some point in our life. I myself have experienced that on at least 2 occasions in my professional career, really moving into this kind of misery of post-traumatic stress and not even knowing that I was in it until I finally had an epiphany that I cannot go on like this. And so I myself have suffered with this lack of self-care at times and realized I can't keep doing this. I'm not going to be able to achieve the goals that I want. My residents or patients are not going to be able to get the services that they need. And so that's why this topic particularly is so, I'm so passionate about it. And Charles and I have talked extensively about it, because honestly, it's something where I truly believe that we as professionals, healthcare professionals, need to practice what we preach. And so here, just looking at latest research, 36% of healthcare professionals, like social workers across the profession, experience high levels of stress. So let's talk a little bit about some definitions here when we talk about stress and unmanaged stress, right? So stress is described as mental, physical, or emotional situation that applies intense pressure, okay? They break it up into 2 kinds of stress. They break it up into compassion fatigue and secondary traumatic stress, okay? So compassion fatigue essentially is a risk connected to service workers who respond to clients who have experienced devastating events. It can result in a breakdown of empathy, irritability, forgetfulness, broken sleep patterns, things like that, okay? But STS, or secondary traumatic stress, is experienced by social workers, or excuse me, service workers, who've acknowledged a traumatic event being suffered by a loved one or client. The trauma occurs during the process of helping or our inability to help. So for those in the psychological industry, it's very similar to countertransference, right? And so you're not actually at the event itself. However, you're experiencing their stress through the experience of your resident. So I think it's important to, to take a look at, those meanings, right? So we kind of know where we fall into those kinds of situations or experiences. Now I'm going to dive a little bit into the science behind this, and then we'll get to talk strategy. So I want to talk about some of the key chemicals that occur in our brain and our body that are related to our emotional or mental health, okay? There's really 4. Here we're going to talk about dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. So these are all neurotransmitters that are fluid throughout our brain and our body. Dopamine is responsible for our alertness, so it allows us to experience pleasure and reward, to where our motivation is, and to be able to have that euphoria sense often that you might get if you're, of course, working out, or if you are achieving something really exciting, and so on and so forth. Norepinephrine, although it's not a key player in some of our emotional in our emotional health, it does play a secondary role. This does help us with our focus. And so it also ties into our fight or flight system, our arousal, our ability to retrieve memories, and our ability to be diligent. And then, of course, we have serotonin, a big player in our emotional health. This is overall, it accompanies with our well-being. And so this looks at our pleasure, relaxation, contentment, and positivity, right? And so when you have a synergistic levels of all 3 of these, you really have what's called a stable mood, right? And that's going to play into our ability to focus, have a good appetite, intuition. I also want to say stable sleep. Now let's dive a little bit more into serotonin, because like I said, it's one of the key factors here in our emotional development. It is our happy chemical in our body. It's found in our brain, our bowels, and our blood platelets. And what's interesting is that, you know, in the psychological or psychiatric industry, right, we focus so much that these chemicals reside in our brain. And a lot of treatment is focused on that when it comes to maybe pharmacological care, right? But the reality is most of our serotonin is found in our bowels. And so I'm going to go more into that a little bit later. But it's interesting for us to know that, because we are going to talk about what we eat as a way for good emotional management or good self-care. When we have a shortage of serotonin, there are a few things we're going to experience. Sadness, possibly developing into depression or chronic depression, low energy and sex drive, irritability and anxiousness, craving, poor foods, poor memory, sleep issues, and a low self-esteem, okay? What can cause the levels of serotonin, okay? Definitely could be a number of things. It's not specific to any one thing. And so whenever we look at the items I explained in or the symptoms that I experienced in the last slide, it's important to always first meet with your physician to rule out any medical conditions that might be going on, okay? It may not even be emotional stress. It might be something else. So it's important to always check that out first. And then if all checks out medically, then we look at what could be going on emotionally or psychologically, right? So what can cause the levels of serotonin? Deficiencies in vitamin B, iron, if there's too much caffeine or alcohol or drug use, nicotine, of course, use of NutraSweet. Some cholesterol medications, their side effects can lower serotonin. Prolonged stress. And so certainly going through a pandemic would equal that. Lack of sunlight, so depending on where you live in the country, of course. Here I live in Illinois, great old state of Chicago, or the city of Chicago, where it's gray most of the year. But we're blessed with sunshine today, which is good. So poor diet, lack of exercise, hormone changes, exposure to heavy metals or pesticides, and there can, of course, be genetic factors to having a low serotonin level. I want to talk about GABA. This was the 4th neurotransmitter that does assist in, of course, in looking at emotional management. It's a natural chemical in our brain that facilitates communication within the cells. It helps manage mood and behavior. It does influence cognition and regulate our stress response, and it impacts our metabolism. So when we have low levels of GABA, what it can compromise, of course, is sleep, our ability to regulate stress, mood, relaxation, concentration, attention, and managing weight. So it's important that, again, when we are experiencing these kinds of things, we want to make sure that we do get a physical first with our, our advanced practice physician, nurse or physician, in order to make sure that we rule out anything medically, because Low levels of GABA can be caused by prolonged stress, poor diet, lack of exercise, hormone changes, and genetic factors. Okay, so it's important to always, again, rule out medically before we assume it might be psychological distress. So let's talk about anxiety, because oftentimes anxiety is the base for a lot of our stress, or what we call, if we are moving towards burnout, okay? It's the base of that. And so the definition in the dictionary for anxiety, I just want to start with that, is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. And I bolded those terms because I think it's important to focus on that. Imminent event, okay, meaning something that may be happening right now or did happen or will happen, with an uncertain outcome, meaning that nobody really knows what that might be, okay? So that's important for us to remember those, because what anxiety is, and I'm a believer in a lot of meditation practices and mindfulness, and they do talk a lot about anxiety as a focus on the past. So it's kind of like your would-haves, your could-haves, your should-haves, right? You're replaying in your mind what happened and how can you change it to be different to your desired outcome. And we talk about prolonged stress, right? Affecting, of course, our serotonin levels, affecting our GABA, potentially dopamine and norepinephrine, right? Prolonged stress, right, can develop into traumatization. And when individuals are experiencing post-traumatic stress, okay, they are focusing a lot on replaying what happened with hopefully the outcome that it will change, and that will hopefully lower their anxiety. It's almost like an obsession to redo that. You know, it also can come in the form of nightmares. And so with that, when they're trying to relive that, they're trying to rewrite that, and it's not rewriting because the outcome was still the same. And so inevitably that anxiety stays there unless you, of course, get some good help with someone who's trained in trauma. What anxiety also can be is a focus on the future. Okay, it's the what ifs, right? It's looking at the future and saying, okay, if this happens to me, this may occur, or what if this doesn't happen, this may occur, right? And so we don't know that outcome. It's uncertain because it's the future and nobody really can predict that. And so when we think about that anxiety of the uncontrollable, right? That's something that a lot of individuals are in the present or ruminating over with something that they cannot control for that future, okay? What is not anxiety? It's the view of the present, okay? That's what not anxiety is. And so I know that kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but the reality is when you are truly in the present, you cannot be thinking about the past, you cannot be thinking about the future. And that's why mindfulness, we'll talk a little bit about that, mindfulness is so powerful when it comes to coping strategies, because it truly can wipe away those thoughts and those feelings to stay present in the moment, okay? So where's the validity of our anxiety, right? If it's reliving what should have been in the past or what may be in the future, then there's no truth to our anxiety, right? Because it's something where if you're in the present, it doesn't exist. So the thing to think about, right, and sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around that initially, right? But think about it in this way. When we are anxious, okay, we are giving a front row in our life to non-factual, nonsensical information about people, places, and things, right? That's what we're doing. And so we're allowing that kind of thought process or whatever it might be to stand in the way of us moving forward. And so it's important when we think about those kinds of things, because I'm going to talk about mindset here in a little bit. And our mindset can be driven down a path of negativity, or we can choose that path of positivity. I love, love, love this quote. The way you think may be leading you rather than you leading the way you think. It's a great quote. And by the way, this book, Mindset, would highly recommend it. recommend it for yourself when it comes to self-care, but it's a great book for not only, of course, our residents, but also families as well. So highly recommend that by Carol Dweck. If our anxiety is not dealt with, it could lead to burnout, right? And so it is a psychological response to workplace stressors. There are three main elements of burnout. One is that our emotions become depleted. We become detached from the job in and of itself, and our sense of well-being just becomes diminished, right? We can't be present with our residents, and we can't be present with our families, and we can't be present with our coworkers if we're burnt out, all right? And so we don't want it to get to that place. We don't ever want it to get to that place. Burnout can lead to really all forms of negative health for ourselves. The things that we preach about to our residents of what they should be taking care of for themselves, these are things that are going to unfortunately negatively impact us. So it could impact our physical and medical health, you know, in terms of aches and pains and frequent illnesses, heart disease, gastrointestinal diseases. Our mental and emotional health, of course, we talked about, could be depression, sadness, anger, irritability, lack of motivation, feelings of guilt or mood dysregulation. Our cognitive health, unfortunately, can also be impacted. There's been much research that shows that with prolonged stress, it does increase cortisol levels, and increased cortisol levels over a long period of time actually change the brain. And unfortunately, it does cause concern in our frontal lobe, where we have the main bulk of our independent skills, where we can problem solve and we can regulate emotions. We have memory in the prefrontal cortex, right? All of that can be impacted, unfortunately, with high levels of cortisol. And it can actually put our brain on automatic fight or flight, where we're always on edge and emotionally driven. And that's really not a good recipe for success. It also can, of course, impact our social health. We might withdraw or isolate from others, have strained relationships, and a lot of absenteeism from work. And ultimately, burnout can lead to high turnover, terminations, unnecessary changes in career, and early retirement, right? And we don't want to sell ourselves short. We don't want to sell our residents short or our employers short. We want to be able to be the most successful that we can be, right? We went in this profession for a reason. We obtained the degree, or we're obtaining the degree that we ultimately are satisfied with and want to move forward with and make an impact. That's why we got into healthcare. So for burnout to take that and rob that from us is not something that any of us deserve. And it's really important that we take a look at this and how we can prevent this from occurring. So what can we do about this? Let's build your toolbox. So number one, of course, we started off talking of that we have difficulty practice what we're preaching. We're going to practice what we preach, right? So you need to take care of yourself first. And I love that Charles uses the oxygen mask discussion when it comes to that. When I'm teaching about self-care, which I often do, that's something I always talk about. You know, when that oxygen mask comes on in the air, or comes down in the airplane, the instruction is that you put on your mask first, so that way you are healthy enough to put on the masks of other people around you, right? Elderly and children. And so if we apply that to life, we need to put our oxygen mask on first so we can be present for our residents and our families and our colleagues and our families too, right? Our children, our significant others and things like that. So we have to take the time to decompress throughout the days and on our days off. Okay, we're going to talk about how do you incorporate that in your lifestyle at the end, but that's important that we do that. That's incorporated in what we do every day. If you are a leader in your profession, I would encourage you to schedule that in your staff's day and be able to help them and model for them positive self-care behaviors. Okay, for example, let's say you have that colleague or that employee that just never seems to take that lunch. They just work through lunch all the time. You know, it's encouraging them to do that. Maybe saying, hey, let's go have lunch down in the lunchroom together. Let's get off the floor. Something to that nature where you're encouraging that modality of positive self-care. And so part of it, again, could be not only you practicing it, but being a model in your department or in your facility. The second thing I call it's called Thinkin, okay? Now the ABCs of thinking has been around in the psychological field for a very long time. It was developed by Albert Ellis, and he talks about, it's in rational emotive therapy, and he talks about the ABCs of thinking. And it really is helpful when we think about the mindset that we need to stay positive, especially during times like this, right? It's basically, you take the ABCs. I'm going to walk you through this example. So A is a situation, right? So let's say the situation is what it is, right? COVID-19 happened. There's nothing we can do about it in terms of it happened. It's here. It's present. None of us knew maybe that it was coming. It's here, right? B is our thoughts about it. So what if we are having negative thoughts about it? A negative thought, which I've heard often, is what if I die? The emotions that would come from that thought process could be worry, fear, anxiety, right? Inevitably leading to burnout. We talked about that. The behaviors are going to reflect our thoughts and our emotions. So we might isolate at home. We might overly wash to get rid of those germs that we're fearful of obtaining that would cause COVID. We might buy items. We might hoard. We might abuse substances, right? I think we've heard some of the output of this. Unfortunately, we've seen a high volume of domestic violence cases. We've seen an increase in child abuse cases. We've seen a high increase in divorces, high level of addiction, and unfortunately, individuals who were sober or clean relapsing. We've heard that, right? And so that can be contributed from this perpetual thought and thought emotion process that's negative. So how do we turn that around as a coping skill, right? This is where we're going to lead the way we think, okay? So the situation, again, we can't change it. We can change our thought process. And so part of it is stopping ourselves in that moment of negativity where we're saying to ourselves, what if I die? And change it to a positive thought. I am alive. And just say that to yourself right now. I am alive. That brings on a different set of emotions. It brings on hope, encouragement, and gratitude for the things that we have. And ultimately, it's going to reflect in our behaviors. We might reach out to others. We might accomplish our goals. We might work towards our own health goals. We might continue to practice self-care. We institute practice of self-care. So it's really changing that thinking and leading the way we think simply by changing our thought process, And I say to people, we're human. We all have negative thoughts. It happens. We call them fleeting thoughts. They come in and then they can leave, right? It's what we do with those thoughts that make all the difference in the world, okay? So we've got to change the narrative on our head. So you get to make the choice if you listen to your thoughts or not. You get to make the choice to challenge your thoughts' truth. You get to make the choice to change those negative thoughts to positive ones, and you get to make that choice over and over. I love this quote too. Also another great book that I would recommend, but Dave Howell says that if you don't take the time to think about what you think about, you may just believe those thoughts in your head, even the ones that aren't true, okay? So sometimes those kinds of thoughts that or sometimes these quotes that we are able to either follow or live by sometimes are nice to type up and put in our office or whatever it might be as well. So the third intervention I want to talk about is diet. And this kind of goes back to an earlier slide that we talked about with regards to serotonin. Really, a majority of our serotonin lies in our gut. And so that whole old saying of you are what you eat is actually true. So when we talk about what is health, we have to look at all aspects of health. And so incorporating a good diet into your self-care regimen is highly recommended. The Mediterranean diet I recommend just because it has, one, tons of research on it that shows its successes, but also it does cover a number of positive areas or areas in terms of disease processes. So it showed that it does it's linked to lower rates of depression and anxiety, lower rates of depression in men and anxiety in women. It's shown great health benefits for individuals with cardiovascular disease, dementia, obesity. And so nonetheless, there's been a lot of great benefits over this. And so one thing, a model that I always say about the Mediterranean diet when I do teach about it is, you see that that glass of wine in moderation. So my saying is always that a glass of red wine a day will keep the nursing home away. So there you go. So again, the gut is actually our second brain, and probably many of us have heard that. So 95% of the body's serotonin levels are found in your bowels. And so it's really important that we do look at how we're eating, because it absolutely can affect our emotional health. The fourth area I want to talk about in terms of interventions for your toolbox is some of us may experience panic. Okay, anxiety is the base for that, which can lead to panic attacks. So I just want to have one slide on this as a way to help individuals through panic, and I call it the 4-step method. Okay, and this is something that I highly recommend that's practiced on a regular basis and not only used when that panic attack occurs, because it's kind of like you want to get good at baseball or or playing the piano. You have to practice in order for when that recital happens or when that big game happens, you are successful. And so I highly recommend practicing this 4-step method. So number one is focus on a focal point, or if someone's in front of you, focus on their eyes. Do not close your eyes, okay? Because that could lead to unlawful thoughts going in places that we don't need them to. So either focus on a focal point if you're by yourself, or the eyes of the individual who's supporting you, that's in front of you. Put your feet flat on the ground is number 2. You're going to, of course, uncross your arms if your arms are crossed, things like that. But you want to feel the ground underneath your feet, okay? The third thing you're going to do is you're going to hold on to something. And the reason why holding on to something is so powerful is because it taps into our parietal lobe in our brain, which partially responsible for tactile stimulation. And that tactile stimulation is imperative because it creates an experience called neuroplasticity in our brain. And neuroplasticity has 2 beautiful, what I call side benefits, right? We're so used to talking about side effects of medications. I like to talk about side benefits of non-pharmacological self-care techniques, or techniques in general. And that is, it helps lower anxiety, okay? And it increases your concentration and focus. And those are 2 recipes for success when you're experiencing panic. Lowers your anxiety, increases your concentration and attention. And that's the beautiful benefit of neuroplasticity. The fourth is breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth, using your diaphragm, which is kind of around your gut area, not your chest. If you're using your chest, that may unfortunately throw you into another panic attack, okay? So remember this 4-step method when it comes to a panic attack. The fifth thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of repeating what I had just talked about with the phenomenon of neuroplasticity, is the power of touch. Okay, the power of a touch, again, is wonderful. Now, I understand in the days of COVID, the power of touch has decreased tremendously, even with our own families. And I hope that at some point we can get that back. But touch can mean anything. It could be playing with something in your hands. It could be gardening. It could be cooking. It could be putting things together. It could be doing some adult coloring. The power of touch, again, is so powerful because it does create that neuroplasticity experience, which I had mentioned. It does increase attention and concentration, and it does lower anxiety, which is wonderful. The sixth area I want to talk about with what to include in your toolbox, and this does take practice, is just being. We call that sitting in the emotion, and so it's simply sitting in the anxiety itself. And you are persevering through those feelings, okay? The reality is that anxiety in itself only lasts a few minutes. The height of it only lasts a few minutes, okay? It will end. And so once you feel like you can conquer that, and it does take practice, you do feel like you can handle this anxiety. You really do. And so sometimes you may have to say a mantra to yourself for a few seconds to get through that anxiety. But know that anxiety doesn't last really any more than a few minutes, and it can be successfully managed by just sitting in it, getting through the moment, and successfully accomplishing it. Now, these are a bunch of daily coping skills that I wanted to talk about when it comes to likes and dislikes, things that maybe have worked for you. These are things that we can do every day. And so I kind of put it all on this one slide for you to kind of view, to say, kind of point out, oh yeah, I do that today. Or, you know what, I wanted to try that, I'm gonna try it now. Or, you know what, actually that didn't work for me, and I probably won't put that in my toolbox. And that's okay. We're all different, we're all individuals. And so my toolbox is gonna look different than your toolbox. And my toolbox might look different than my toolbox I would potentially use with my resident who has dementia, or my resident maybe who has schizophrenia or something to that nature, right? Some of my faves that I do on a regular basis to make sure that I'm practicing self-care is I do a lot of journaling. I try to exercise 2 to 3 times a week. I do love reading when I do get a chance. And actually during this pandemic, I was able to finish a book for pleasure, which for me, that's an accomplishment. I was very excited about that. I like to drink my coffee outside and just listen to the birds. It's the most relaxing thing for me. It's something where I am able to kind of practice gratitude. And not only do I practice it, of course, internally in my mind, but I actually do journal the things that I'm grateful for on a daily basis. But the combination of those things do help me as well. I love taking hot baths. For myself, I meditate, as well as I regularly use essential oils. And so these are things, again, you can incorporate in your life, and hopefully that, you know, provide you that solace. The 8th area I want to talk about, if needed, is psychotherapy or counseling. You know, I truly believe that everyone should have their own therapist. We have our own dentist, we have our own PCPs, women, we have our own gynecologists, right? Why not have your own therapist on a regular basis? And not that you have to go on a weekly basis. It could be a tune-up once a month. It could be, you know, once every 6 months, just a check-in session. You know, I think I do think the stigma of counseling and psychotherapy has gotten better, you know, but I still think we have a ways to go. And especially with our senior population, I think we have a ways to go with that population. But I truly believe that we honestly all could benefit from having a therapist in our life. It is an opportunity to process what's going on in a non-judgmental, impartial platform. You know, it's one thing to go to a friend or maybe to a colleague or your spouse and talk about the things that you're experiencing, but all those individuals have some type of investment in you at some level, and they may not give you a non-judgmental response. They may not give you an impartial response. And so it's really important that when you're talking to someone, this individual knows nothing about you. So one, my honest get to God truth is be truthful with these people, because one, it's a service that I think you can truly benefit from, but you're also paying for, but it allows them to fully get a good picture of what's going on. And so it really can help you just to have that kind of third set of eyes looking into your life that maybe can give you a perspective that you being in the midst of it really, you know, you haven't been able to kind of pull yourself out of it, you know, especially if you're in the kind of depths or throes of prolonged stress, right? I myself have seen a therapist, you know, throughout my lifetime here or there for things that I needed, and it 100% has helped me. The thing though is you have to look for the one that's going to meet your needs, right? And we do the same thing, right? If you go to a dentist and they're really rough in your mouth, you're going to find a different one, or maybe you go to a PCP that doesn't spend the time that you want with them, you're going to find a different one. So same thing with a counselor, with a therapist, is find the one that works for you. And that relationship and the impact it can have in your life is just astronomical. So, and the good thing is that it's covered by most insurances. Now, during this pandemic, make sure you do check with your healthcare insurance provider, because a lot of providers are, you know, if it's insurance offered through your employer, they are retro paying back to the beginning of the pandemic. So meaning that you won't have to necessarily cover copays, they'll waive your copays. So if you've been paying copays, just double check with your insurance company. So those are really all, in summary, those are the areas that I'm recommending for your toolbox. And you may have other things that you've done that are successful. I would say definitely keep those in your toolbox. But hopefully I was able to provide some new interventions, or maybe some new coping skills that you haven't used before, or potentially ones, like I said, that you've tried in the past and you maybe just need to brush the cobwebs off of them, if you will, right? Let's talk about implementation, because that's really important when it comes to how do I do this, right? People say to me, Dr. Stelter, come on, I've got a family, I've got little kids, I work a full-time job, I'm a part of different kinds of organizations. And you know what, the person I just described, that's me, okay? And I find the ability to be able to put this into my lifestyle every day. It didn't come easily, and it didn't come, early on in my life. I had to stumble block through things, as I mentioned to you. I've had those experiences where I've got caught in the throes of prolonged stress, and it has led to burnout. And I promised myself that I would never let that happen to me again. And so I preach to you to implement this, right? So think about, what you do for fun or what makes you feel relaxed, right? Those are your things in your toolbox. And you're going to schedule these things into your calendar. It's very important that you do that, because we always say, oh yeah, I'll get around to it maybe Friday or Saturday, right? I'll go to the gym, 3 times this week, I'll try to make it, right? But the reality is, if you don't schedule it, it probably is not going to happen, because our life is really busy. So schedule it. Is it on Tuesdays from 6 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. before you get into the car to go to work? Or is it before you pop on your computer because maybe you work from home now, and maybe you're not comfortable going to your gym right now, but maybe it's a walk around your block because we have nice weather, or maybe it's getting on your bike or something to that nature. But schedule it into your day-to-day, okay? Schedule when you're going to meditate. Schedule when you're going to journal. Schedule when you're going to potentially, if it's just playing with your pets, those kinds of things. I do recommend taking an hour a day for yourself, but you can build up to that, right? So maybe start with 15 minutes a day, okay? And then from there, maybe you do that for a week. And then the second week, you incorporate 30 minutes, and so on and so forth, okay? This is something I want you to think about. There are 24 hours in a day, okay? You choose how you spend those 24 hours. Yes, you've got responsibilities and things like that, but those are all choices. And you can move things around to be able to incorporate this. Now, it depends on the season. Things may change, and you may have to switch up when you do your self-care based on what's going on currently in your life, right? I definitely had a self-care regimen that was different pre-COVID to what I have now, because now my household consists of my 2 children are at home all the time. My husband is working from home full time, and I'm in the field. So I had to switch how I practice my self-care skills, because it wasn't like it was before. But I had to sit down and consciously think about it, right? And so it's shifting in our seasons based on what we have. But the important part is you've got to schedule it to make it happen. So I just want to leave you guys with, and we're going to go ahead and get to questions here in a second, but I just want to leave you guys with remembering that what you do for yourself now is going to impact who you are. It's so important that we take care of ourselves, because we've got to be present there for our residents and for our families and for our own families and our friends. We are only going to be able to do that if we are healthy ourselves. So stand up and be present for yourself first. So Charles, with that, we'll go ahead and go to any questions that we might have.
So I do want to pause and say that this was fantastic, Dr. Stelter. Thank you so much for presenting it. And I can tell you that many, if not most, or all of the professionals that I interact with on a daily basis could use some of these, knowledge. Yeah, we've had a number of questions, and I think the first one that we've had numerous times is, do you have any advice when it comes to helping us manage the anger or the different types of emotions that we might get from family members.
Mm-hmm. Sure, absolutely. And I would definitely say the first thing is take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. We have to think before we react, right? Actually, what's happening is when we take a deep breath, and I would recommend a few before we react, and it could be something where you are kind of doing it quietly to yourself. If you're maybe on a Zoom with a family member, because I know right now a lot of families are not in our nursing homes, but in the event that they are, because I know every state's a little bit different now, you can do those 3 breaths to yourself quietly, or if you're on the phone, you can do it before reacting. When we take an extra oxygen to our brain, it actually allows for us to be able to focus and concentrate better. And it's going to calm us down. Okay, so that's number 1, is take those breaths first before we react. I always start with when I'm working with someone who is angry, whether that's a resident, a family, or just any colleague potentially or employee, is I start with the good and I end with the bad, right? So starting with the good is validate their feelings. That's really important, because the first thing you want them to know is that you're listening. And validation in that process automatically does that for people. And it's saying something like, you know what, I know that you're really angry right now and I am so sorry. I don't want you to feel angry. And I think that's true. I think we all genuinely don't want others to feel angry. So I think by stating the obvious is that you're recognizing that they're angry, and you're saying to them that you apologize for the fact that they're angry. You're not apologizing for what maybe they're angry about, because maybe they're not, they're not thinking clearly themselves. They're, overly agitated right now. But you're apologizing for the fact that they're angry, and you don't want that to be possible for them, right? So in that of itself, you're validating, okay? Then, depending on what they're angry about, if you can pull any nuggets of positivity out of it, of what we are doing to help their loved one, or how we can spin what this has done for us as a whole, right? Then you go into anything that you do negatively need to share with them, okay? So in terms of looking at, pointing out what the concern is, but then after that, what is going to be our plan to fix what they're angry about, okay? And so there's a very small window of focus on the negativity because we have to talk about it, but we are then quickly going to go into into problem solving with resolution.
Thank you. We only have 3 minutes left, but there was another question I wanted to ask you. It came up. Bad dreams. What do we do about the bad dreams that keep on coming back?
Absolutely. So when people have nightmares, there are a few things that individuals can do. And this is really going to be case by case. Number one, I just want to say, if you do feel that you have suffered trauma through this, I highly recommend working with someone who has been trained in trauma-informed care. Those individuals are going to be able to work with you on symptoms like having nightmares. There is also a therapy that's called EMDR, and that does focus on nightmares and trauma in general. But in the event that you're looking to kind of nip this in the bud yourself, you want to do some positive things before you go to bed. So it could be that you are watching a funny comedy. It could be that you're playing pleasant music. Maybe it's that you give yourself a self-massage, or your spouse does. Something that can end your day and de-stress yourself before you go to bed. I personally sometimes love to diffuse essential oils. Lavender is really good for sleep. And that kind of, if you diffuse it all night, helps you actually stay asleep, which is great. So I will often do that if I'm experiencing any disruptions in sleep. Journaling is also positive because it can get off what's on your mind onto the paper, and allows that kind of process to happen naturally while you are journaling. So oftentimes, if you can de-stress, let go of what's on your mind, and naturally be able to sleep throughout the night, that's really going to help with the nightmares.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Again,
absolutely.
on the screen, this was a fantastic presentation. All right, so on our screen now we have the contacts of both Dr. Seltzer and myself. Feel free to reach out anytime should you have any question on this fantastic presentation. I do want to share upcoming webinar opportunities. With Activity Strong, we've doubled the amount of webinars that we do, so we have 2 a month now. And I want to point everybody out to the fact that we are also going to be holding quarterly gathering in partnership with NAP and NCAP in the winter and then, in the fall and in the winter. And we already have the date for 2021 summit. And if you want to register for these, you can go to our website and go to the event page. With that, again, Dr. Salter, thank you so much for your time and your invaluable presentation. And I look forward, thank you. And good luck to everyone. Again, thank you so much for the work you do. It's an honor to work with you. And please take care of yourself.
Take care.
Cheers.
You can go ahead and end the recording, Charles. And I put the CEU survey link into the chat box, and it will also